Shadeside Palace stands as a bastion of civilization on the coast of the desert within the Dune Valley Breach. Constructed by the first Sultan Takam Suat, the Crimson Lord, it was designed with opulence and function in mind. Within its walls are the comforts of the aristocracy, finely aged wines, smoked meats, fragrant incenses, and glittering gold to frame it all. In stark contrast to this glittering spectacle, the winding tunnels beneath the palace are dry and dark, secluded and labyrinthine in nature. Soon, Nadia would come to know this. But for now, she was a simple young woman, excited to be visiting the Sultan's court. She had not heard of this labyrinthine dungeon, nor did she ever expect to learn of it. Nadia had been invited to the court of the great Sultan Aden Barbaros, the Golden Lord himself, who had summoned her merchant caravan to the palace on their stop through Shadeside. As she walked into the palace, she carried with her only the finest silks and tapestries, the most perfect porcelain volutes, all for the Golden Lord's pleasure. She too came to the palace, well dressed in her own fine red silks and brass jewelry, her black hair tied into a long over-the-shoulder braid, woven through with what little gold chains she possessed. When she walked into Shadeside Palace, she would be presentable and impressive, a true exemplification of her nation's pride. When her brothers and sisters entered the court, carrying her caravan's goods, Nadia held back, waiting to be the last one to enter. When eventually she did, she saw before her a grand throne room, with majestic golden scrolling over each wall, a throne of solid gold with opal crystals around the top like a halo, and an entire wall of crimson rubies glittering in the sunlight behind it. On the throne sat the Golden Lord himself, a tan-skinned man with bright yellow eyes wearing a robe of woven gold and white thread. As she entered, he stood from his throne and gestured to the steps below him, steps adorned with the gifts of her caravan. Handcrafted jewelry, cut gemstones, and scavenged relics from the ruins of the deep desert. She carried her own tribute to these steps, laying it at the feet of the Golden Lord. There, she knelt amongst her kin before the Sultan, reverent in her worship. But even still, she yearned for more. She just wanted to look into the face of the Sultan, the man who had pulled their nation from the Dark Ages, drew the nation from the brink of their own self-made destruction. The man that had guided the nation's progress with a steady hand. As he enriched the nation, it was only right that they enrich him in return. But in that moment, she was selfish. This seed of selfishness grew into a need, a desperation to look into the face of this reclusive lord. A ruler to most, a demigod among many, but to her and her kin, a god among men. Nadia, in her need, could not contain herself, and as she looked up to see the Sultan, she was met with a cold expression and a furrowed brow. And still she stared up into the face of the Golden Lord, his golden eyes staring back at her, meeting her gaze. Her heart dropped. These eyes were hard and unfeeling, if anything angered by her overstep. Without saying a word and without breaking her gaze, the Golden Lord simply raised his hand for the guard. As the guard seized her, Nadia burst into tears, begging for mercy from the Sultan, begging him to forgive her misstep before she could be dragged off by the guard. As she was being dragged off by the guard, the Sultan raised his hand again. Offer her to the prison below the castle. She will wander the twisting maze below, and if she can recover my crest from the labyrinth, she will have earned my forgiveness. Then, as if matter of fact, he simply turned in the swish of his long robe and sat on the throne, staring back at this sight intensely. As the Sultan turned from her towards the throne, finally breaking her gaze, Nadia felt the cold chill of fear settle over her like a blanket of fog. She had lost favor with her lord, she had fallen from grace, and like a common criminal was being sent to the dungeon. As she was dragged through the halls of the underbelly of the palace, the opulence faded with each level, fading to dark carved stonework and rough iron bars. Dragged through the halls of a rough dungeon, she saw prison cells containing hunched figures, one human, a tiefling chained at the wrists, a gnome held in a stockade clamped around her neck. But she just still did not stop there, not in that prison. Nadia was dragged further, and even amongst the dirty sunken eyes of the prisoners here, she saw a pity for her. Suddenly, she was lifted and thrown hard, and as she gasped in terror, she saw the light of the torches mounted within the prison fading, and the unsympathetic faces of the guards as they watched her fall down a deep pit of carved sandstone. She fell for a moment, just long enough to take in the heartbeat and the silence, the slamming rhythm of her pain and regret. Then she hit the ground, slamming hard against the worn sandstone floor with a sickening crack. Pain shot up her spine before it simply ended, her arms and chest arching as the air was knocked from her. Laying there, she struggled to catch her breath, holding herself in a tight hug. Her finely braided hair was now a mess, loose and flying in all directions. Her finest clothes torn and dirtied. How far she had fallen from walking proudly into the throne room but a few minutes before. As Nadia lay there, she cried in the pitch dark. Nothing could save her from this. Nothing could save her from this pain. Even if she found the Sultan's crest, she would forever be changed by this. As she had this thought, a slithering sound like cloth against stone registered on her ears. Taking a shaky gasp, she pushed herself up on her elbow. In a single shaft of light from the dungeon above, she peered out into the darkness. She could see nothing but the shadow. The slithering sound came again, and from her left. She tried to stand, but she could not, realizing only now through her adrenaline and sorrow that she couldn't feel her legs. She tried to move them, but they did not respond, and as she choked back a sob, she heard the slithering again, to her right this time. She peered into the dark, trying to find what had been making that noise, when she heard it move behind her. "So the Golden Lord has taken your legs," came a hissing voice from the dark. Swallowing hard, Nadia shook her head. "I have taken them myself. My hubris is my own fault. But the Golden Lord has sent you to me," the voice hissed from the dark, "and in doing so, shunned you, disavowed you." The words hurt, stinging like a dagger in her heart. It was true, she'd been abandoned for this transgression. "I wanted too much," she sobbed. "You wanted too little," the voice hissed back to her left again in the dark. "But don't worry, down here is a place to belong." The light from above began to fade as the guards moved a heavy wooden lid over the pit's entrance. Slowly, the light faded until Nadia was left in the pitch black. As her eyes adjusted, she finally saw it. A creature of skin and scale, dressed in crimson robes and golden jewelry. The figure of a woman before her, dressed in this opulent yet dirty red robe, and wearing heavy golden jewelry. Her hair long and writhing in a mane of serpents, snapping and hissing at each other around her head, cocked in curiosity, finally looking towards her. Finally, the last feature that she took in was this woman's deep crimson eyes. The pitch-black irises of this beautiful woman were fixated on Nadia, and as Nadia met their gaze, she felt a lurch in her stomach and a firmness to her chest as, with her last thoughts, she realized that her sins had led her here. They had led her here to pay penance for all time. Even then, this thought ceased as her flesh rippled and gray, rigid texture took its place, turning her to stone in but a moment. The creature stepped forward with a sad smile, leaning down to caress the stone cheek of the now fully petrified woman. "Fear not, my lady has room for all of those who don't belong," she hissed before gripping the stone woman and dragging her off into the maze of winding tunnels behind her.